obviously, there is a big epidemic, no pun intended, uh, regarding people thinking they're doctors, and there's this populist revolt against the medical profession, and then all the experts are talking about the history of things like vaccines and of the value that doctors bring to the game, and that you wouldn't do brain surgery on yourself. Okay, given, I get those things, but I would ask the experts, don't defoul yourself by 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 doing the thing you're doing with the COVID response, whereas you insisted you were right, you then shut down dissent, and now you're admitting you're wrong quietly and not really apologizing for it. So it's one thing to armchair quarterback, but when you have people who in the moment were telling you you were wrong in the moment, and you not only didn't listen to them, which is, we all make mistakes, fog of war, I get it. You didn't listen to them, but you demonized them.
Yeah.
Then that's going to
So
be an issue. And then when you're throwing in things like obvious issues with gender that we're dealing with these days, where the medical profession is just selling out on basic axioms of when life begins, when it ends, what it means to be a man and woman. Well, obviously, even though you are probably qualified to do brain surgery because you have the technical ability, and your judgment has just been clouded because you've applied a moral filter to these very obvious issues and applied it incorrectly. I'm not going to trust you on brain surgery if you can't get the basic stuff right, even if you can do the brain surgery. So,
yeah, I think that's a great point, and it's true, but I think part of what happened is we hear this term a lot lately, politicization. I mean, I think that's what we were experiencing with this COVID thing, whether we like it or not. And the history books, I think, will certainly, assuming they, Lord knows we've had a lot of revisionist history in recent decades, but I think they'll get it right, because it ultimately has become so obvious, and they will. I don't think they will be able to not. So it depends on who's writing them, I guess, but they won't be able to ignore the fact that this has happened the way it has, and yeah, it's been. I mean, I don't think the healthcare profession has been in a more precarious position in its history, given the way it responded and acted during that period of time and allowed it to be politicized. But I think, a lot of it is just, we've been saying this forever. Goes back to the question of our time. This is what happens when you have a government that is just too big and too intrusive and has too much power. And, subsidiarity is thrown out the window. So I think people are... There are signs that people are waking up to this. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm just hopeful, but and foolishly hopeful. But I think it's becoming more evident to maybe some folks that don't normally pay as close attention that we were really lied to in this thing, and this was a complete fiasco, and this was wrong, I mean that's just from our perspective. Then you go to some of these circumstances where you have kids that have had serious emotional issues over being locked up the way they were. And even as serious as just to look at what's happened to the suicide rate amongst young people, it's heart wrenching, and it didn't need to happen. So I'm sorry to say that we were right in March of 2020, and that it would cost a lot more lives than this disease would ever take. And then to come to find how they were lying about what the deaths from the disease were. I mean, it's a dark stain on the medical profession and the healthcare profession. And I don't know how you get that back, but anytime soon. But it's why you're having this sort of cottage industry of alternatives come up. And that is I don't want to say it's dangerous.
it can be.
It can be. It's concerning. It's concerning because you don't want to be so, anti-establishment, if you will, to where you're turning away the obvious cure for something just because it happens to come from pharma, for example, traditional pharma. I mean, I'd like to think that there are still good people that are trying to come up with medicines that will save people's lives. Now, part of the reason why, again, that we're having problems with pharma is too in bed with government. There should be some sort of rule. I hate even talking or saying things.
Government
like that,
needs a rule to protect us from government.
Well, the FDA is a disaster with respect to the the coziness with which the industry and the regulators are working with each other. I mean, there needs to be some sort of
Chinese wall.
moratorium on your ability to be able to bounce from one side of the equation to the other, which there isn't right now. And I think that's one of the big problems you have. You've got this, you're in the farm industry, then next day you're in on the regulatory side, then you're back on the farm end. I mean, that just doesn't, it's just not good. So again, I don't like regulation, but there are certain things sensibly that you need to have some level of, if there's anything that you want to have some government involvement in. That's probably it, doing some sort of analysis of, the efficacy and the safetiness of drugs. But we're not doing that right now. For one thing, it takes too darn long because of all the regulatory bureaucratic nonsense, and then just getting basic stuff right. Like, okay, let's eliminate some of the conflicts of interest that can inherently come up when you allow people to bounce back and forth from industry to the regulatory side. There's some simple things that I think can be fixed. And if Congress is doing its job, those are the kinds of things it's focused on, not the nonsense that most of the time they are focused on. Not trying to, now there's a crisis, if you will, that has a reason why, that there's a reason why government should be involved in helping to solve that crisis. There's a problem with that, as opposed to most things like, the regulatory regimes that have come in the wake of 0809, came in the wake of .com. We've talked about them ad nauseum, that, maybe even with good intentions, we're trying to solve problems for the average person. It just made it worse, or created, the law of unintended consequences stepped in and created things that, issues that they hadn't thought about. So, it's easy to sit here, playing armchair quarterback, but, on the other hand, I don't think we did when we were vocal about what we thought on the COVID thing. So that wasn't armchair quarterbacking. That was in the thick of it. That was in the thick of the game and early in the game. And I wish more people were saying that, but people were in positions of power. Obviously, it wasn't us. So anyway,
quick exit question. Yeah. Maybe you have an answer, maybe you don't. What, setting aside COVID or interest rates, what is the greatest failure of the so-called experts that sticks out in your mind?
Well, I mean, I kind of think what we just experienced, what we were just talking about, is I've said, and I will continue to say, I think this will go down in world history as being one of the greatest frauds ever perpetrated on mankind.
But setting aside COVID.
Oh, you said set aside COVID. Oh gosh, I don't have an answer to that one off the top of my head, Doug. Rephrase that? What's the greatest example of
the so-called
failure of the so-called experts?
Yeah, I'm gonna say probably either. And again, I probably would have been wrong about these in the moment. I know I was for some of them, but maybe Vietnam War, the war in Iraq, Carroll's decision to throw in the Super Bowl against the Patriots. So I don't know, things like that. So.